Soaking dried beans overnight to have the cooking time, stretching one ham hock across 4 meals, knowing the grease was ready just by tilting the skillet. None of this came from a cookbook. Most of it was never written down. Here are 30 secret hillbilly kitchen tricks to cook faster with less waste. Every kitchen in the mountains kept a jar of bacon grease next to the stove, and if you grew up in one of those houses, you already know the rules. You never poured it out. You never let it burn. You strained it through cheesecloth or an old piece of flour sack into a tin can or a crockery jar, and it sat there, warm, golden, ready, beside the salt and the cast iron. That jar was the starting point for nearly everything. Cornbread, fried potatoes, wilted greens, gravy, even popcorn on a Saturday night. Store-bought oil cost money nobody had, but the grease came free with breakfast every single morning. One strip of bacon produced enough fat to fry an egg and season a skillet. A month's worth could carry a household through the lean stretches between hog-killing seasons. Your grandmother never called it recycling. She called it common sense. The jar is gone from most kitchens now, and she would not understand why. Nobody in those kitchens ever seasoned a skillet on purpose. They just cooked in it, morning, noon, and night, and the iron did the rest. Every pour of grease, every batch of cornbread, every round of fried okra laid down another thin layer of polymerized fat that turned raw metal into something slicker than any factory coating. The old women knew which skillet was ready for eggs and which one still needed more time. They knew never to use soap, never to let it soak, and never to put it away wet. A good cast iron pan passed from mother to daughter like jewelry, heavier than it looked, black as night, and worth more than anything in the cupboard. Wagner and Griswold foundries produced the best ones through the 1950s, and those old pans are still the ones people fight over at estate sales. The new ones come pre-seasoned from a factory. The old ones came seasoned by a lifetime of somebody's hands. A single pot of pinto beans could feed a family for 3 days if the woman cooking knew what she was doing, and she always did. Day 1 was the beans themselves, slow cooked with a ham hock, an onion, and enough water to cover, served over cornbread with raw onion on the side. Day 2, she added water and a handful of elbow macaroni, turning leftover beans into a thicker soup that tasted different enough to feel new. Day 3, in went a can of tomatoes and a few drop dumplings made from flour, lard, and a splash of milk. 3 nights, 3 textures, 3 flavors, all from one pot of dried beans that cost pennies. The trick was never letting it boil dry and knowing when to add the water. Too early and it thinned out. Too late and the bottom scorched, which meant losing the fond that gave Day 3 its depth. You learned it by standing at the stove beside her, watching the bubble rate. When the lettuce went limp or the carrots turned soft, nobody in a mountain kitchen threw them out. They filled a bowl with cold water, stirred in a teaspoon of salt, and let those tired vegetables sit for about an hour. The cells in the leaves and roots absorbed the water, the walls stiffened back up, and what looked ready for the compost pile came back crisp enough to serve. Household guides in the 1950s documented the trick, and decades later, food scientists confirmed that cold water increases pressure inside plant cell walls, while the salt bolsters the pectin that holds them rigid. The mountain women who used it every week did not need a laboratory. They had watched their own mothers do it. Overnight, soaking could bloat vegetables too far, so the 1-hour window was the sweet spot. Long enough to revive, short enough to keep the texture honest. Nothing left the kitchen until it had given everything it could. Long before any of those vegetables hit the table, the most radical trick in these kitchens started not at the stove, but in the front yard, with a hollow log, a bucket, and a pile of fireplace ash. Water poured slowly over the ashes and caught in a wooden bucket below produced lye, and that lye transformed dried corn kernels into hominy through a process called nixtamalization, a technique with Cherokee and indigenous roots going back thousands of years. The kernels soaked until their skins slipped off, swelling into something white, tender, and entirely different from the hard yellow corn that went in. What the old cooks could not have known was that this process unlocked niacin trapped inside the corn, a vitamin the body cannot absorb from untreated kernels, and it was the reason mountain families who ate hominy avoided the pellagra that devastated communities further south. The same ash that heated the house also made the soap and freed the nutrition in the grain. The women who cooked on wood stoves understood heat the way a pianist understands keys. Every inch of that iron surface ran at a different temperature, and they used all of it at once. Directly over the firebox was the hottest zone, where the skillet sat for frying. 6 inches to the right, the heat dropped enough for a steady simmer. The back corner barely held a warm-up temperature, perfect for keeping gravy from skinning over. Above it all, the warming shelf, a flat ledge near the stovepipe, held plates at serving temperature, kept bread dough rising and dried herbs without scorching them. A woman working one of these stoves in the 1930s was running 4 heat zones simultaneously without a single dial. She adjusted by sliding pots across the surface, opening or closing the damper, and adding a split of hickory when the fire dropped too low. You knew the stove was right when you could hold your hand 6 inches above the surface and count to 3 before pulling away. In late summer, when the apple trees bent heavy with fruit, the real work started. Not the picking, but the preserving. She peeled them in one long spiral with a paring knife worn thin from years of use, and the peels went straight into a pot for apple butter. The slices she threaded onto lengths of cotton twine with a darning needle and hung from the ceiling beams or the porch rafters. They dried in the warm air over days, shrinking into leathery rings that lasted through winter. Come January, those dried apples rehydrated with sugar and spices for fried pies, or slow-cooked into filling for a stack cake, or simmered into what mountain families called cooked fruit, their word for applesauce. No dehydrator, no canning equipment, no electricity required, just twine, a knife, and a warm room. The women who did this every fall did it the same way their mothers had, and the ones who remember can close their eyes and be back in that kitchen the moment the smell returns. Wood cost labor and labor cost time, so every fire had to justify itself. The Dutch oven answered that equation better than anything else in the kitchen. One heavy pot, one fire, one meal, meat on the bottom, root vegetables in the middle, dumplings dropped on top in the last 30 minutes. The cast iron held heat so evenly that nothing scorched if you set the damper right, and the tight lid trapped steam that basted the meat while the broth built below. By the time the pot came off the stove, you had protein, starch, vegetables, and gravy, all from a single vessel on a single flame. Some women started it before dawn and let it cook through the morning while they worked the garden. The broth at the bottom was thick with rendered fat and vegetable starch, and it carried forward into the next day as soup or gravy. One fire, one pot, one cleaning. Hog killing day in the mountains was not a chore. It was an event, and every family within walking distance came to help because the work was enormous and the rules were absolute. Nothing was wasted. The hams and shoulders went to the smokehouse for months of curing over hickory. The leaf lard, fat from around the kidneys, prized above all other fat, was rendered slowly for baking. Intestines were cleaned, scraped, turned inside out, and stuffed with seasoned sausage. The head simmered for hours until the meat was picked from the skull and pressed into head cheese with vinegar and spices. Feet became souse, skin became cracklings, rendered crisp and crumbled into cornbread. The blood in some Scots-Irish mountain families was caught in a pan and cooked into pudding. Bones went into the soup pot and simmered until they gave up everything. One animal, slaughtered in November, fed a family through March. In those kitchens, the drain was the enemy. Potato water, starchy, faintly salted, still warm, went straight into the gravy. Bean broth, dark and smoky from the ham hock, became the base for tomorrow's soup. The water left over from boiling corn carried enough sweetness and starch to mix into the next batch of cornbread batter, and it made the bread moister without adding a grain of sugar. Even the water from boiling eggs was saved and poured cooled over garden plants for the calcium from the shells. The trick was knowing which water went where and never pouring any of it out without thinking first. She tasted the broth, judged the color, decided whether it had enough body to carry a gravy or needed to reduce further. Every pot of water that touched food left it changed, and the water itself came out carrying flavor, fat, and nutrients that had somewhere else to go. If saving cooking water was common sense, then pot liquor was religion. The dark broth left behind after slow cooking a mess of collard greens or turnip greens with a ham hock was considered by many mountain families to be more valuable than the greens themselves. Vitamins leached during hours of simmering. Vitamin C, vitamin A, calcium, iron, concentrated in that liquid, and the old women who ladled it into cups and drank it warm knew it kept them strong through winter, even if they could not name a single nutrient. Others sopped it with cornbread, pressing the bread into the broth until it was saturated. In black Southern and Appalachian kitchens alike, pot liquor was the bridge between poverty and pride, a reminder that the humblest part of the meal often carried the most nourishment. The argument over whether to dunk the cornbread or crumble it into the liquor has started more kitchen debates than politics ever did. Today, most greens drain straight into the sink. Before electric meat slicers showed up in butcher shops, mountain cooks had their own method for cutting beef or pork thin enough to fry fast and stretch further. They set the piece in the icebox, or later the freezer, for 20 to 30 minutes. Not long enough to freeze solid, but just enough to firm the muscle fibers so a sharp knife could glide through in clean, paper-thin slices impossible at room temperature. The result was meat that cooked in seconds, perfect for country fried steak pounded flat and breaded, or for jerky strips laid across racks in the smokehouse. A single round steak, partially frozen and sliced with care, produced enough portions for 6 where a thick cut would have served 3. The trick required nothing but patience and a blade kept sharp on a whetstone. Nobody advertised this. It passed from one pair of hands to the next, along with the understanding that making something last mattered just as much as making it taste right. Before white sugar reached the mountain stores at a price anyone could pay, sorghum was the sweetener that held Appalachian kitchens together. And making it was an event that shut down the whole hollow for a day. The cane grew tall as corn along creek beds, planted from seeds saved the year before. Come October, families stripped the leaves, cut the stalks, and fed them through a wooden roller press hitched to a mule walking in circles. The green juice ran into a copper evaporator pan over a wood fire, and from there it was stirring, hours of it, skimming the green foam, watching the color darken, waiting for the moment the syrup sheeted off the paddle instead of dripping. The tradition carried African roots brought through enslaved people into Appalachia, and by the 1940s, Kentucky led the nation in sorghum production. A single fall batch filled enough jars to sweeten biscuits, cakes, and coffee all winter. The stir-offs are mostly gone now. The taste they left behind is not. In the deep hollows of West Virginia and eastern Kentucky, lemons were a luxury that arrived by rail, if they arrived at all. So when a woman wanted a tart, custard-style pie, she reached for the bottle of apple cider vinegar on the shelf. Mixed with eggs, butter, sugar, and a little flour, then baked in a lard crust, the vinegar lost its bite in the oven and left behind something close to lemon custard, bright, tangy, with a sweetness that crept up on you. Church cookbooks in the 1940s listed it as mock lemon pie or surprise pie. And the surprise was that nobody could guess the main ingredient. The chemistry worked because heated vinegar partially neutralizes against the sugar while the volatile acids evaporate, leaving only brightness behind. Some Appalachian versions swapped white sugar for sorghum, which gave the filling a deeper, smoky quality. By the 70s, it had slipped out of most recipe boxes. The women who made it best never measured. They poured until it smelled right. If vinegar could become a pie, then yesterday's cornbread could certainly become tonight's supper, and in the fastest, strangest way imaginable. You crumbled it into a tall glass, poured cold buttermilk over the top, added a slice of raw onion, and ate it with a spoon. No cooking, no heating, no dishes beyond the glass and the spoon. Mountain families called it cornbread and milk, or sometimes cornbread and buttermilk, and it was eaten as a full meal. Lunch, supper, or a late-night bite when the stove had already gone cold. The tangy buttermilk softened the crumbled bread into something halfway between cereal and porridge, and the raw onion gave it a sharp bite that cut through the richness. During the Depression, it fed families on days when nothing else was available. Even after times improved, plenty of mountain men kept eating it out of pure habit, standing at the counter the way their fathers had. Your grandfather probably made this when he thought nobody was watching. She brought the pot to a rolling boil on the wood stove, pulled it off the heat, and nestled it into a wooden box packed tight with hay. Then she closed the lid, walked away, and let the trapped heat do the rest. Hours later, the beans or stew inside was cooked through, tender, thickened, still warm, without burning a single additional stick of wood. The hay box, also called the fireless cooker, appeared in rural American kitchens as far back as the 1890s and survived into the 1940s, especially in mountain homes where firewood meant hours of splitting. Some women used old blankets or crumpled newspaper instead of hay, whatever insulated well enough to hold the temperature steady. The method worked for anything that needed long, slow heat: dried beans, porridge, tough cuts of meat. It freed the stove for other tasks and freed the cook for other work. When gas and electric ranges made heat cheap, the hay box vanished. The principle behind it never stopped being brilliant. The argument over whose lard was best could split a church congregation faster than a doctrinal dispute. Every woman in the hollow rendered her own, and every woman believed hers was the purest, the whitest, the one that made the flakiest biscuits, and she would tell you so whether you asked or not. The process started with leaf fat, the clean white fat from around the pig's kidneys, considered the finest grade. She cut it into small pieces, dropped them into a cast iron pot over low heat, and stirred slowly for hours as the fat melted and the solid bits shrank into golden cracklings. The liquid was strained through cheesecloth into crocks or tin pails to cool into smooth, snow-white lard that lasted months without refrigeration. The cracklings went into cornbread. Store-bought shortening arrived in the 1950s, promising convenience, but the old women knew the pie crust never came out the same. Some of them kept rendering until they could not stand long enough to stir. The trick was so simple it barely qualified as a recipe, and that was exactly the point. After frying a slab of salt-cured country ham in a cast-iron skillet, she poured leftover black coffee, strong, bitter, still hot from the pot on the back of the stove, straight into the pan. The coffee hit the drippings with a hiss, loosened every caramelized bit of meat stuck to the iron, and within 2 minutes produced a thin, dark, reddish-brown gravy that tasted like nothing else on earth. They called it red-eye gravy because of the small circle of fat that floated on the surface like an eye staring up from the plate. It went over grits, over biscuits, over the ham itself, whatever was closest. The gravy required no flour, no butter, no thickener of any kind, just ham drippings and coffee and the instinct not to clean a pan until it had given up its last flavor. The man she made it for is gone now. The skillet is still in the cabinet. Nobody has poured coffee into it since. The name itself told you where it came from. Kilt was Scots-Irish mountain dialect for killed, and Kilt lettuce was exactly what it sounded like. Fresh greens hit with enough heat to wilt them dead in the skillet. You started with bacon drippings, still hot and popping from breakfast. Into that went a splash of apple cider vinegar, a pinch of sugar to cut the acid, and then the lettuce. Leaf lettuce or wild cress or whatever was growing, tossed fast with tongs until it collapsed. The whole thing took under a minute. The warm, tangy, smoky greens went straight onto the plate beside the cornbread, and the juice left in the skillet got sopped up with whatever bread was left over. In the 1920s and 30s, Kilt lettuce was a standard side dish across Appalachian, Kentucky, and Virginia, especially in spring when the first tender greens came in from the garden. You did not need a recipe. You needed a hot skillet, leftover grease, and about 45 seconds. If Kilt lettuce was about speed, pickled watermelon rind was about patience and about refusing to let a single part of the fruit go to waste. After the red flesh was eaten, the thick white rind was peeled, cubed, and soaked overnight in salt water to draw out the moisture. The next day, It was boiled in a syrup of sugar, vinegar, cinnamon sticks, and whole cloves until the cubes turned translucent and sweet. Packed into mason jars and sealed, the rind could last a year on the cellar shelf. It showed up at church socials and county fairs in the 1940s and 50s, lined up alongside chow chow and bread and butter pickles, and the women who made it best were known by name throughout the congregation. The sweet, sour crunch beside a plate of pork was something you did not forget. Most people today throw the rind away without a thought. The women who spent 2 days turning it into a delicacy would not have understood that kind of waste. After the slices were strung up to dry and the good pieces set aside for pies, what remained were the peels and cores, the parts a modern kitchen throws straight into the garbage. In a mountain kitchen, they went into a copper kettle over an open fire and cooked down for hours into apple butter so dark and thick it held a spoon upright. The stirring was the job nobody wanted and everybody had to take a turn at. A long wooden paddle moved in constant circles to keep the bottom from scorching, and if you stopped too long, you ruined the batch. Community apple butter stirrings were day-long events in the hollows of Virginia and West Virginia through the 1950s, with neighbors rotating at the kettle while kids ran circles around the fire. A single cooking produced enough jars to last 2 households through winter. The kettles are mostly in antique shops now. The women who stirred them are mostly gone. Nothing that came off a stalk of corn left the property without serving at least 2 purposes. The ears fed the family. The dried shucks wrapped tamales in households with Cherokee or Mexican influence, and in others, they were braided into chair seats, twisted into scrub brushes, or stuffed into mattress ticking. A shuck mattress crinkled when you turned over, and every child who slept on one remembers that sound. The silks, thin as thread, were dried and steeped into a tea that mountain herbalists used for kidney complaints. The cobs, stripped clean and dried in the sun, became fire starters, pipe bowls, stoppers for jugs, and handles for tools. Even the stalks were bundled into fodder shocks for winter livestock. One plant, grown in every garden from the 1920s through the 60s, fed the household, furnished the beds, cleaned the pots, started the fire, and treated the sick. A wedding in the mountains did not come with a bakery order. It came with neighbors, and each one carried a single thin cake layer to the celebration. The bride's family stacked them, 6, 8, sometimes 12 high, with dried apple filling or apple butter spread between each one, and the finished cake sat overnight so the moisture softened the dry spice layers into something dense and rich. The number of layers told you how the couple was regarded. A 4-layer cake meant a small gathering. 12 layers meant the whole community showed up. The tradition was Scots-Irish in origin, rooted in a time when no single household could afford a full cake alone, and it survived in the hollows of eastern Kentucky and southwest Virginia through the 1950s. Each woman's layer tasted slightly different: her sorghum, her spice blend, her hand, and the finished cake carried the flavor of every kitchen that contributed. She never dropped potatoes into boiling water, and she never explained why. She filled the pot with cold water, added the potatoes, salted it heavy, and set the whole thing on the stove to come up to temperature together. The potatoes heated evenly from the outside in, the starch set gradually, and by the time the water reached a boil, the centers were already halfway cooked instead of raw, while the outsides fell apart. It was the difference between a potato salad with clean, firm cubes and one where every piece crumbled when you stirred it. The same rule applied to every root vegetable in the cellar: turnips, parsnips, beets, and to dried beans, which she also started in cold water and brought up slowly. The technique needed no thermometer and no timer, just the patience to let the heat build on its own. You asked her once why she did it that way. She looked at you like you had asked why water was wet. But not every trick in these kitchens was something you did alone. Some of them only worked because the whole porch was full of hands. On late summer evenings, women and kids gathered with bushels of green beans, needles, and heavy cotton thread. They snapped the ends, threaded the beans through the center one by one, and hung the long strings from porch rafters to dry in the open air. The dried beans, called leather britches in some hollows, shuck beans in others, shrank and darkened over weeks until they looked like nothing you would want to eat. But soaked overnight and slow-cooked with a ham hock, They rehydrated into something with a concentrated, smoky depth that fresh beans could never match. The stringing was the social event: gossip, singing, arguments about whose beans dried best. Kids learned to thread by watching, not asking. The porches are quiet now. Your grandfather drank his coffee from a saucer, and you watched him do it 100 times before you understood what you were seeing. He poured the scalding coffee from the cup into the saucer, blew across the wide surface until steam stopped rising, and sipped from the rim. Mountain people called it Sassering, and it was the standard way to drink coffee in Appalachian kitchens from the 1920s through the 50s. The wide surface area released heat faster than the narrow mouth of a cup, and the thin layer of liquid dropped temperature almost instantly. It was a working person's trick. 10 minutes saved at the breakfast table meant 10 more in the field. The saucer was always part of the cup. That was the point. When he died, your grandmother washed his cup and saucer and set them back in the cupboard. They are still there. The same fireplace ash that made the lye for hominy served one more purpose before it was done. It made the soap. Leftover cooking fat and rendered drippings past their best were collected in a bucket beside the stove, and when enough had gathered, the lye water was mixed in and the whole batch boiled slowly in a cast iron pot outdoors until it thickened. Poured into wooden molds and left to cure for weeks, it hardened into bars of lye soap, harsh enough to strip grease from overalls and gentle enough, when made right, to wash a baby. One batch lasted a household 3 or 4 months. The women who made it measured nothing. They tested the lye strength by floating an egg in the solution and watching how high it rode. Everything that entered the kitchen eventually left as something else. Fat became soap. Ash became lye. Waste did not exist. Stale biscuits collected in a tin on the counter all week, and by Sunday they were hard enough to crack a tooth. She tore them into pieces, biscuits, leftover cornbread, the heel of a loaf, and dropped them into a deep baking dish. Over the top went eggs, milk, sugar, and a long pour of vanilla, and the dry bread soaked it up while the oven heated. Sometimes she drizzled sorghum instead of sugar. Sometimes she scattered dried apple slices or a handful of black walnuts picked that fall. The mountain version was denser and sweeter than any city recipe, heavy and satisfying, with a crust on top and a soft custard center underneath. Nothing in that kitchen went stale long enough to throw away. Every crumb had a destination, and bread pudding was the last stop. She made it without measuring a single thing, and nobody who has tried since has gotten it exactly right. Spring in the mountains meant one thing before it meant anything else. The dandelions were up, and the yard was suddenly full of food. The leaves, picked young before the flowers opened, went into the skillet with bacon drippings the same way any greens did, wilted fast, hit with vinegar, served alongside beans. But the flowers were the real surprise. Picked on a dry morning, steeped in boiling water overnight, then strained and boiled with sugar, lemon juice, and pectin, they produced a golden jelly that tasted closer to honey than anything from a flower. Kids picked the blossoms by the bucketful, and a single afternoon's harvest filled a dozen half-pint jars, all of it free, growing in the yard that modern homeowners spray with poison to keep clean. The jars sat on the cellar shelf between the apple butter and the pickled beets, and when the last one opened in January, spring was still a long way off. The last trick is the one that cannot be taught, because it was never written down, and the hands that held it are gone. She measured flour by the handful. She salted by instinct. She knew the dough was right by how it felt between her fingers, and she knew the pie was done by the smell that reached the front room, except there was no timer. She cooked by sound, by color, by the way the grease moved in the pan, by decades of standing in the same spot, doing the same things her mother taught her without a word of written instruction. You watched her. You thought you were learning. But what she carried was not a recipe. It was a rhythm, a feel, a lifetime of adjustments made so quietly you never saw them happen. You have her recipe box now. The cards are blank. She never needed them. And you, standing in your kitchen with every tool and every measurement, still cannot make it taste the way it did. Boiling potatoes with their skins to retain nutrients was a practical trick to maximize the nutritional value during rationing. Removing skins before cooking often wasted the fiber and vitamins that resided in and just under the potato skin. By boiling them whole with the skins on, families kept more nutrients intact, making every bite count. This method also reduced preparation time and minimized waste in kitchens where every resource mattered. After cooking, the skins were peeled off easily, sometimes used in other dishes or composted. Potatoes were a staple wartime food due to their availability and ability to grow in many regions. This simple step ensured that their health benefits were not lost in the cooking process. The technique showed how attention to detail in the kitchen could stretch limited food into a more nourishing meal. Today, many cooks appreciate this method for both nutrition and flavor, keeping a small wartime secret alive. Wrapping green tomatoes in newspaper for ripening extended tomato season weeks past first frost, turning potential waste into winter abundance. When cold threatened gardens, Grandma harvested every tomato, regardless of color. Each was individually wrapped in newspaper, not plastic, never touching each other, and stored in basement boxes. Paper trapped ethylene gas tomatoes naturally produced while ripening, concentrating it around each fruit to speed the process. Separation prevented one spoiling tomato from affecting neighbors. Every few days, Grandma checked her stash, pulling newly reddened tomatoes for immediate use while leaving green ones to continue transforming. This provided fresh tomatoes well into November, when grocery store varieties tasted like cardboard. Children helped with wrapping, learning the harvest didn't end when weather turned cold. That newspaper became packaging extending the garden's gifts for weeks beyond its natural season. Using vinegar to tenderize meat was how mountain families transformed tough cuts into something approaching luxury without spending money they did not have available. A few splashes of apple cider vinegar added to the marinade broke down tough muscle fibers in wild game and older livestock that would otherwise require hours of cooking. Families made their own vinegar from apple scraps, so the ingredient cost nothing beyond initial effort. The acid worked slowly overnight, penetrating deep into meat while adding subtle tanginess that complemented strong flavors of venison, squirrel, and tough old roosters. Women learned exact proportions through generations of practice, knowing how much was enough to tenderize without making meat mushy. The marinated meat could then be fried, roasted, or stewed with significantly shorter cooking times. This trick made poor cuts taste like quality and stretched limited protein into satisfying meals. Cooking with pressure. Cookers for efficiency became a valuable trick during World War II when fuel and time were limited. Pressure cookers reduced cooking times drastically by trapping steam and raising the boiling point of water. This meant tougher cuts of meat and dried beans could be prepared quickly, saving both energy and precious time. Many families learned to use pressure cookers to stretch ingredients further, making dishes that would otherwise take hours on the stove. These pots also helped preserve nutrients that might be lost during longer cooking. The ability to prepare a hearty meal fast was essential when rationing limited both fuel and food. Pressure cookers became common in wartime kitchens, praised for their practicality and convenience. Today, while electric appliances have taken over, the principles of pressure cooking remain a reminder of how innovation met necessity. Using a pressure cooker was not just about speed, it was about making the most of scarce resources and easing daily burdens in difficult times. Butter wrappers saved for greasing pans represented Grandma's understanding that nothing useful should ever hit the trash bin. Every time she unwrapped butter, that waxy paper went into a refrigerator container, accumulating until needed. When pans required greasing, Grandma rubbed residual butter across surfaces with perfect economy. The thin coating was exactly right, enough to prevent sticking without excess fat making baked goods greasy or cookies spread too thin. Children learned to save wrappers automatically. The practice meant never dirtying a brush or wasting whole butter pats on greasing duties. Those wrappers worked better than cooking sprays because they left no chemical aftertaste and created even coverage. During wartime rationing, when butter was precious, this became essential survival knowledge. Today, we throw away perfectly good wrappers without a second thought. Cooking on the shovel blade was frontier ingenuity at its most practical when families lacked proper cookware or needed quick meals away from the kitchen hearth. A flat-bladed shovel, cleaned thoroughly and heated over open flames, became an instant griddle for frying eggs, toasting bread, or cooking small portions of meat. Field workers carried shovels anyway, making them dual-purpose tools that fed hungry workers during long days away from home. The metal heated evenly when held at the right angle over flames, and the long handle kept hands safe from the fire. Fathers showed sons how to judge temperature by watching metal change color and feeling heat radiating upward. Food cooked directly on the blade picked up a faint mineral taste that became associated with outdoor work and simple satisfaction. This technique required no additional equipment and worked anywhere a fire could be built, making it invaluable for remote work. Dehydrating fruits for long-term storage was a clever preservation method that helped families save their garden bounty for the winter months. Fresh fruits like apples, berries, and peaches were sliced thin and dried to remove moisture, preventing spoilage. This process concentrated the sweetness and flavor while extending shelf life without refrigeration. Dehydrated fruits were used in baking, stews, and snacks, adding natural sugars and vitamins to otherwise plain wartime diets. The practice required patience but paid off by providing nutritious ingredients when fresh produce was unavailable. Many families set up simple drying racks in sunny windows or outdoors during the warmer seasons. Dehydration also reduced bulk and weight, making fruits easier to store in limited pantry spaces. This preservation technique was a testament to the resourcefulness of home cooks determined to maximize their harvest. Today, dried fruits remain popular, but the wartime origin highlights how necessity fostered smart food conservation strategies. Stale bread revived with water was grandmother's refusal to waste a single slice when the loaf turned hard and dry overnight. Instead of tossing it for the birds or grinding it into crumbs, she ran the entire loaf quickly under the faucet, letting water dampen the crust without soaking through to the center. Then she wrapped it tightly in foil and placed it in a hot oven for 10 minutes. The bread emerged soft, warm, and steaming as if freshly baked that morning. The water turned to steam inside the foil, rehydrating the crumb while the crust crisped up perfectly. This trick worked for rolls, baguettes, and any yeast bread that had dried out on the counter. Children couldn't tell the difference between revived bread and fresh, and families stretched their grocery dollars further. The technique represented Grandma's fundamental belief that food deserved respect and second chances before being discarded. Greasing cast iron with Fatback was the secret behind every properly seasoned skillet in rural Appalachian kitchens across the Mountain South. Fatback, the thick layer of fat from a hog's back, was rubbed across cast iron cookware while still warm, creating a protective coating that prevented rust and built the non-stick surface that made mountain cooking possible. Women saved every scrap specifically for this purpose, keeping pieces wrapped in cloth near the stove where they stayed soft and ready to use. The process was repeated after every use, building layers of seasoning that turned cheap cast iron into family heirlooms passed through generations. A well-seasoned skillet required no additional oil for frying and released food effortlessly. Children learned this ritual by watching mothers perform it hundreds of times before being trusted with precious cookware. This simple trick transformed basic equipment into tools that lasted lifetimes and cooked food with unmatched quality. Using gelatin to set leftover meat juices was an ingenious way to transform scraps into a new dish that stretched ingredients further. After roasting or boiling meat, the remaining juices were collected and combined with gelatin, which was more commonly used in wartime cooking than it is now. This mixture was poured into molds and refrigerated, creating savory aspects that could be sliced and served. These dishes added variety to meals and made use of parts that might otherwise be discarded. Gelatin helped preserve the nutrients and flavors, providing protein-rich options even when fresh meat was limited. The resulting aspects were often mixed with chopped vegetables, eggs, or bits of meat, making them more appealing and hearty. This technique reflected the resourcefulness of wartime kitchens, where wasting any part of food was unacceptable. Aspics served cold also offered a refreshing change in warmer months. Although gelatin dishes have faded from modern menus, they once held a respected place at tables across America. Rediscovering this trick shows how creativity and respect for ingredients helped families survive with less. Adding a pinch of coffee grounds to gravy was grandmother's secret weapon for achieving deep, mysterious richness that made Sunday dinners unforgettable. Nobody could identify what made her gravy different. Darker, more complex, with savory depth that lingered. A tiny spoonful of unused grounds stirred into pan drippings before adding flour created gravy that tasted like it simmered for hours. Coffee didn't make gravy taste like breakfast. It enhanced meaty, roasted flavors while adding professional-looking color. This worked especially well with beef and pork gravies, where slight bitterness balanced meat-fat richness. Grandma learned it from her mother during hard times when stretching flavor meant stretching resources. The grounds also helped thicken gravy slightly. Modern recipes never mention this addition, leaving cooks wondering why their results taste flat compared to Grandma's legendary version. Making gravy from pan drippings was the technique that turned every meat dish into 2 meals and wasted nothing in kitchens where every calorie counted towards survival. After frying or roasting meat, the browned bits and rendered fat left in the pan became foundation for rich gravies that stretched protein into something more filling. Flour was sprinkled directly into hot fat and stirred constantly until it formed a paste that cooked to golden brown, developing deep, nutty flavors. Milk, water, or broth was added slowly while stirring to prevent lumps, creating smooth gravy that captured every bit of flavor from the original meat. Children learned to make gravy by standing beside mothers at the stove, learning exact motions and timing that defined good cooking. The gravy was poured over biscuits, potatoes, and cornbread, making small amounts of meat feed large families. Nothing was scraped into garbage when this knowledge lived in households. Making war ration sandwich spreads was a clever way to turn limited ingredients into something satisfying. People would blend canned fish, often salmon or mackerel, with whatever vegetables were on hand, like pickles or onions. Mayonnaise substitutes made from rationed ingredients helped bind it all together. This mixture stretched thinly over bread, turning simple sandwiches into meals that could fill bellies without breaking wartime restrictions. The beauty of these spreads was their adaptability. If fresh produce was scarce, canned or preserved vegetables stepped in. The result was a flavorful, nutritious option that made the most of pantry staples. These spreads were also easy to prepare, which helped busy families feed themselves quickly. They became a staple at lunchtime tables across the country, proving that resourcefulness could turn the leanest rations into something worth eating. The practice encouraged creativity and minimized waste, both essential during the war. Today, these simple sandwich spreads remind us of a time when making do was not just a choice, but a necessity. Trying out these recipes can give us a taste of resilience and cleverness from kitchens of the past. The bread heel trick for keeping brown sugar soft was grandmother's clever solution that cost nothing but solved everything. Brown sugar turned into a brick within days of opening, requiring a hammer to break apart. Grandma simply dropped a bread heel, the end piece nobody wanted anyway, into the container and sealed it tight. Within hours, rock-hard sugar transformed into soft, scoopable sweetness. Bread released moisture slowly, rehydrating the molasses coating without making sugar wet or clumpy. This hack turned kitchen scraps into problem solvers, using unwanted bread ends children pushed aside. Some grandmothers used apple slices or orange peels instead, adding subtle flavor while restoring texture. The trick worked for weeks, keeping sugar ready for cookies and oatmeal. Modern cooks buy expensive terracotta discs, never knowing a simple bread heel could solve the problem. Soaking beans with baking soda was a trick that solved 2 problems at once in mountain kitchens where fuel was precious and time was always scarce for busy families. A pinch of baking soda added to soaking water softened dried beans faster by breaking down their tough outer skins, reducing cooking time by hours. For families burning wood, they had chopped themselves. Shorter cooking times meant real savings in labor and resources. The alkaline water also neutralized compounds that caused digestive discomfort. making beans easier on stomachs. Women learned exact amounts through trial and error, knowing too much soda left a soapy taste while too little made no difference. The beans soaked overnight in crocks near the warm stove, absorbing water and releasing starches. By morning, they were plump and ready, cooking to creamy softness in half the usual time. This knowledge passed quietly between neighbors as practical wisdom that made survival easier. Making hobo stew with mixed vegetables and meat scraps was a one-pot meal that brought together whatever was on hand to feed families efficiently. This stew combined less desirable cuts of meat, leftover vegetables, and pantry staples simmered slowly to develop flavor and tenderness. The name reflected its humble origins, but the dish was hearty and comforting. Using a single pot minimized fuel usage and cleanup time, which were valuable considerations during wartime. The flexible recipe meant cooks could adapt it to what was available, reducing waste and stretching ingredients. Hobo stew embodied the spirit of making do with less and turning scarcity into sustenance. Its warming qualities made it a favorite in many homes, especially during cold months. Today, it stands as a symbol of resilience and practical cooking wisdom from a time when every morsel mattered. Onion skins for dyeing Easter eggs produced colors that store-bought tablets could never match: deep amber, rusty brown, and burnished gold that looked like treasures. Grandma saved yellow and brown skins for weeks before Easter, stuffing them into paper bags. Eggs wrapped in those papery skins, secured with rubber bands, then simmered gently in water with vinegar to help color adhere. Results were stunning natural marbling effects, each egg emerging unique. Some grandmothers pressed small leaves against shells before wrapping, creating botanical prints impossibly delicate. Red onion skins produced lavender tones while yellow created deep golds. This connected families to centuries of tradition when synthetic dyes didn't exist. The eggs were completely safe since onion skins were food grade. Children gathered watching eggs transform, learning patience and appreciating beauty from simple natural sources. Smoking meat in the chimney was how mountain families preserved pork, game, and fish, using smoke from fires they were already burning for warmth and cooking. Hooks or racks installed inside chimneys held meat in the rising smoke stream, which dried and flavored the flesh while depositing preservative compounds that prevented spoilage. The technique required careful attention because too much heat cooked the meat while too little failed to preserve it, so families positioned racks at exactly the right height. Different woods produced different flavors, with hickory and apple being prized while pine was avoided for its resinous taste. The process took days or weeks depending on the size of cuts, with someone checking regularly to ensure even smoking. Meat preserved this way lasted through entire winters without refrigeration, providing essential protein. The chimney served double duty, heating the home while preparing food for storage throughout the winter months. Stretching meatloaf with oats or breadcrumbs was a common tactic to make meat supplies go further during the shortages. When meat was scarce and expensive, people found that adding oats or breadcrumbs bulked up the mixture, making a smaller amount of ground meat feed a whole family. These fillers were inexpensive and readily available, making them perfect wartime kitchen helpers. Oats added texture and absorbed flavors, while breadcrumbs helped bind the loaf together, keeping it moist and filling. Seasonings and vegetables mixed in also helped improve the taste and nutritional value. This clever trick allowed households to serve a classic comfort food without using as much precious meat. It also introduced more fiber and whole grains into the diet, which was an unintended bonus. The stretched meatloaf became a symbol of frugality and culinary ingenuity, showing how people adapted familiar recipes to hard times. It was a meal that provided warmth and sustenance when resources were limited. Trying this method today offers a glimpse into how much thought went into conserving food during those challenging years. Vinegar added to poaching water was the difference between restaurant-quality poached eggs and stringy disasters. Grandma's eggs held together in perfect teardrops, whites wrapped snugly around golden yolks without wispy tentacles floating everywhere. Her secret was splashing white vinegar into simmering water before cracking eggs into the pot. The acid caused whites to coagulate faster, setting the outer layer before it could drift apart. This created compact, beautiful eggs rather than ragged messes. The amount didn't need to be precise. A tablespoon or two per quart was plenty, and vinegar flavor cooked away completely. Grandma also swirled water gently before dropping eggs, creating a vortex helping whites wrap around yolks. She knew to use the freshest eggs since older ones had thinner whites that spread regardless. This simple addition transformed a frustrating task into something achievable. Wrapping food in wet newspaper before burying it in coals was a technique that created steam cooking without any equipment at all beyond what most families had available. The dampened paper protected food from direct contact with ash, while moisture trapped inside created pressure that cooked fish and vegetables evenly throughout. Mountain families learned this from Native American traditions and adapted it to their own needs, using whatever paper was available from rare newspapers to catalog pages. The paper charred on the outside while food inside steamed to perfection, emerging clean and thoroughly cooked. Timing was crucial because too long meant paper burned through while too short left food underdone. Experienced cooks developed instinct for judging coals and thickness. The technique worked especially well for delicate fish that fell apart when fried, keeping flesh intact while infusing subtle smoke flavor. Children watched this magic happen at fish fries. Substituting butter with bacon drippings for cooking was a tasty and efficient way to replace scarce fats. Butter was rationed during World War II, forcing cooks to seek alternatives that could provide flavor and needed fat for cooking and baking. Bacon drippings, the fat rendered after frying bacon, were collected and saved for reuse in frying vegetables, seasoning beans, or baking savory dishes. This leftover fat added a smoky richness to meals that butter sometimes could not provide. Using bacon drippings was economical, preventing waste and making the most of limited resources. Families learned to store drippings carefully, sometimes mixing them with other fats to stretch them further. This substitution became a staple of wartime kitchens, balancing scarcity with flavor. Today, it serves as a reminder that necessity often inspires delicious creativity, turning something left over into a prized cooking ingredient. Cast iron seasoning secrets were guarded knowledge that grandmothers demonstrated through decades of daily cooking rather than explaining outright. Those black skillets, passed down through generations, developed surfaces so slick that eggs slid around without a drop of oil needed. Grandma never used soap on her cast iron, just hot water, a stiff brush, and immediate drying over a warm burner to prevent rust. After every use, she rubbed a thin layer of lard across the entire surface while still warm, building layers of polymerized fat that created natural nonstick protection better than any factory coating. She knew acidic foods could strip seasoning and cook tomatoes elsewhere. She understood slow heating prevented warping. These skillets outlasted every fancy coated pan store's sell, working better each passing year. The tragedy is how many perfectly seasoned pieces sit neglected in estate sales because new generations never learned their proper care. Burying potatoes in ash was one of the oldest cooking methods mountain families used before electric ovens existed in rural Appalachian communities. Fresh potatoes were nestled directly into warm ashes at the edge of a fireplace, covered completely until only coals surrounded them on all sides. The ash acted as insulation, slowly roasting potatoes over several hours until skins turned papery and insides became fluffy and sweet. Families learned exactly how deep to bury them through years of practice passed from grandmother to granddaughter. The technique required no pots, no pans, and no fuel beyond what was already heating the home. Children were sent to check potatoes by poking them with sticks, learning doneness through texture rather than timers. The finished potatoes emerged with subtle smokiness no modern oven could replicate. This method fed families through winters when other cooking options were limited and fuel was precious. Using cabbage leaves as wraps for stuffed vegetables was a natural and economical way to hold ingredients together during times of scarcity. Large cabbage leaves served as edible containers for mixtures of grains, vegetables, and sometimes small amounts of meat. Wrapping dishes this way conserved cooking vessels and made serving easier. The The leaves added a mild, fresh flavor and extra fiber to meals. Cabbage was widely available, inexpensive and hearty, making it a perfect vegetable to support this technique. Stuffed cabbage leaves were filling and visually appealing, offering a sense of comfort despite limited ingredients. This method also reflected the wartime emphasis on stretching every resource without waste. Many families passed down recipes that used cabbage wraps, keeping the tradition alive long after rationing ended. Revisiting this trick today reveals how simple, affordable vegetables became heroes in kitchens facing adversity. A pinch of salt in coffee was Grandma's answer to bitter brews that made faces pucker and stomachs clench. She didn't add sugar to mask bad coffee. She prevented bitterness with a few grains of salt added to grounds before percolating. Salt ions blocked taste receptors perceiving bitterness, allowing coffee's natural sweetness and complexity to shine. This worked especially well with cheaper blends and older beans that lost freshness, turning mediocre coffee into something smooth. During the Depression, when families couldn't afford quality beans, this trick made every pot palatable without expensive cream or sugar. Grandma added salt so instinctively she never measured. Just a pinch between fingers dropped into the basket. Visitors commented on how smooth her coffee tasted, never guessing the secret in the salt shaker. Modern baristas rediscovered this technique, but for decades it lived only in Grandmother's muscle memory. Storing eggs in water glass was the preservation method that kept mountain families supplied through winter months when hens stopped laying entirely and eggs became scarce. Water glass, a solution of sodium silicate and water, sealed eggshells by filling their tiny pores and preventing air and bacteria from entering. Fresh eggs were carefully lowered into crocks filled with the solution, where they remained edible for 6 months or longer without refrigeration. Families gathered eggs during peak laying season and preserved dozens at a time, ensuring protein through lean months. The technique required clean eggs with intact shells, so women handled each one carefully, rejecting any with cracks that might introduce contamination. Eggs preserved this way cooked normally, though they sometimes produced flatter whites, which mattered little when food security was the priority. The crocks were stored in cool cellars where temperatures stayed stable. Creating homemade mustard from mustard seeds was a clever, cost-saving way to add flavor when store-bought condiments were scarce. Mustard seeds were inexpensive and could be ground at home to make fresh mustard pastes of varying heat and intensity. This homemade version was used to season meats, dress vegetables, and enliven sandwiches. Making mustard from scratch gave cooks control over the ingredients and helped avoid reliance on rationed or imported products. Mustard's sharpness also helped mask the blandness or substitutions often found in wartime dishes. Many families learned to prepare and store their own mustard, turning a simple seed into a pantry essential. This practice encouraged self-sufficiency and brought bold flavor to otherwise plain meals. Homemade mustard's popularity during the war reminds us that small touches can make a big difference in food enjoyment, especially when resources are tight. A potato and oversalted soup was Grandma's emergency rescue for dishes that seemed ruined beyond repair. When a heavy hand with the salt shaker turned tonight's dinner into a sodium disaster, she didn't panic or start over. Instead, she peeled a raw potato, cut it into chunks, and dropped them into the simmering pot for 15 to 20 minutes. The potato absorbed excess salt like a sponge, pulling the harsh flavor out of the broth while adding subtle starch that improved the soup's body. Once the potato chunks turned translucent and soft, she fished them out and discarded them, leaving behind a perfectly balanced soup. This trick worked for stews, sauces, and any liquid-based dish that had gone too salty. The science was simple absorption, but the result felt like kitchen magic. Grandma kept this remedy ready because mistakes happened, and throwing away food was never an option when budgets were tight and groceries didn't come easy. Keeping butter cool in the well was the refrigeration method mountain families relied on before electricity reached rural hollows. A covered crock or bucket containing butter was lowered on a rope into the family well, where water temperature stayed constant around 50 degrees year-round regardless of summer heat above ground. The butter remained firm and fresh for weeks without turning rancid, protected by both the cool temperature and the darkness that prevented light from breaking down the fats. Families designated specific depths for different foods, knowing exactly where to position the rope for optimal cooling. Children were often tasked with lowering and raising the buttercrock, learning responsibility through this daily chore. The technique required watertight containers and careful handling to prevent contamination of the drinking water below. This simple system provided what modern refrigerators do today, using nothing but the Earth's natural temperature regulation and a bit of rope. Making fruit butter from overripe fruit was a smart way to turn imperfect or aging fruit into a delicious and long-lasting spread. Instead of letting fruit go to waste, wartime cooks slowly cooked down overripe apples, peaches, or pears with just a small amount of sugar to create a thick, flavorful butter. The low sugar content was intentional, as sugar was rationed and often in short supply, so cooks had to find ways to sweeten food without using much of it. This spread could be used on bread, served with biscuits, or added to breakfast dishes, giving meals extra flavor and variety. The process also helped preserve the fruit for longer periods, making it a practical pantry staple. Families often experimented with whatever fruit was on hand, and the resulting fruit butters became a cherished way to stretch food supplies while still enjoying sweet flavors. Making fruit butter was a testament to the creativity in wartime kitchens, turning potential waste into something nourishing and tasty. This tradition carries on in many homes today, keeping the spirit of resourcefulness alive. Wooden spoon across the pot prevented boilover disasters that left stovetops covered in starchy foam and required hours of scrubbing. Grandma laid a wooden spoon horizontally across the top of any pot cooking pasta, rice, or potatoes, and somehow the water never climbed over the rim. The science involved temperature differences. Wood doesn't conduct heat like metal, so bubbles contacting the cooler spoon popped before they could cascade over. The dry surface also burst the foam's surface tension. This simple trick meant Grandma could step away from the stove to tend other tasks without returning to find a mess spreading across the burners. She didn't know the physics, but she knew the wooden spoon worked every single time. Children learned this instinctively, placing spoons across pots without being told, carrying the habit into their own kitchens decades later. It cost nothing and prevented countless cleanup headaches. 30 kitchens went quiet. If even one of these tricks made you hear a voice you miss, share this with someone who remembers.